I'm Coach Dave. Welcome back to Coach's Corner.
Come on.
Welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner. I'm Coach Dave McDonough, and today we have a special guest today. We have Alex Ballou, combat sport participant, but recently fought her first bare knuckle fight at Mohegan Sun last month in March. Also having the fight of the night. And, Alex, I welcome you here and thank you for taking the time out to come on Coach's Corner. I know you got a busy schedule. We appreciate it. Welcome.
No, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So we'll jump into it a little bit here with you. Before we get to the bare knuckle fight thing, you have a big background in combat sports. Tell us a little bit about that.
So as a kid, I did sports. I played primarily soccer, but I did do karate, softball. And then I guess when I went to college, I played soccer, but not on the school team. And I just figured I would never be a professional athlete or continue, or, you fall into that mindset of, oh, I'm going to go to school, get a job, and then you move on with your life. And I found that after school, there was something missing, I guess, and I just wasn't sure what it was. But I remembered when I was active or learning or, through sport, I was happy. So I signed up for jiu-jitsu. And around that time, that's when I believe Ronda Rousey started fighting in the UFC, and they started making these women's divisions. And I was always a huge fan of the UFC back when I was on Spike.
Right.
So I started watching, and then, I don't know, I just got this crazy idea, and I was unhappy with, jobs at the time. I was doing sales, and I just decided to go for it. So my jiu-jitsu background kind of brought me into more MMA. Started training. I took a fight. I didn't really have a huge striking background, but that started to develop. I started to meet, people through other gyms, and put it all together, and then found my way into fighting.
So in the early parts of this, right, like most athletes, you're coming out of an athletic background, and you find after college there's a void, and you're competitive. So you are looking to be competitive at some spot to, what in the beginning, a lot of women are not fighting at this point, combat sports, UFC, MMA. Where did you go to find this fit for yourself to start training with jiu-jitsu? And then obviously, how does it lead to a fight so fast?
So at the time I was living in Bethlehem, and I wasn't really sure where to begin. So, it was a very basic internet search, I guess, for jiu-jitsu gyms in my area. I was working in Woodbury, and I had found one in Brookfield, and I guess the gym at the time was Soul Fighters. I'm not sure if they're still active under that name anymore. I believe they're Double Five Jiu-Jitsu now. But, I started to learn about like jiu-jitsu lineage in terms of like the black belt and how it goes all the way back. So I ended up joining Soul Fighters out of Brookfield. And there I met, at the time, the head coach was Rafael Formiga, and he was a jiu-jitsu, world champion. And then another coach there was Philippe Costa, who is also a highly competitive black belt. And he became my primary coach at the time in jiu-jitsu. So he was hugely fundamental in my growth, and also in believing in me. Because when I told him, I think I walked in the gym, and actually I told him I wanted to fight MMA. And he was like, oh, that's good. He's like, well, we're going to start jiu-jitsu. And I didn't realize at the time, because the grappling was my least favorite thing in the UFC. And it became one of my favorite things after learning jiu-jitsu. And then I learned that striking is actually super similar to jiu-jitsu in terms of your setups, the techniques, they all build off one another. So I enjoyed that. And then from there, they had a connection with former UFC fighter and New England legend Matt Bissett. And then his partner, Jeff Haddad, who's also a regional MMA champion. They had a gym in Bristol. So it kind of all leapfrogged off each other. And then they know Nick Newell.
Right.
So kind of just
How
became part
long
of
are
the
you
group.
training at this point? Now, it's you're in the gym and look, and I've known you a little bit now from working with you, so I could see that attitude of you walking into the gym saying, "I want to be a fighter," and I think that's a great attitude. I think honestly, if you're going to go into the deep end, you got to have that attitude. You got to have a little swagger to go in. But how long are you training at this point?
Probably not long enough, if
Right.
I'm being honest. I had a couple years of jiu-jitsu under my belt at that point, but virtually no striking. And I went for it. I
Was
think I
it
was about 6 months in training overall in MMA when I got my first amateur fight.
so now you're in the gym? So it's not just primarily jujitsu. It starts out as jujitsu and transitions. Am I correct by saying it that way, or is it primarily jujitsu and now you're saying, okay, let's go to the next step?
Yeah, I didn't really, I'm going to be honest, I didn't really have a huge game plan in terms of, it was very basic. I was like, okay, I've been doing jujitsu. I've been, hitting mitts and everything. I didn't have a lot of technique behind it. And I went for it. And we found a fight. We found a promotion that was willing to put together a fight. It was Cage Wars up in Albany. And I ended up winning by a guillotine choke. But, I landed some hard punches, some hard shots. But, the things like, corkscrewing your cross, sometimes walking through the punches. I didn't really have any good techniques in terms of parrying, head
Yeah,
movement.
you're learning on the job.
Yeah, exactly.
You
Trial
you
by
know,
fire.
how long was it before your first fight that you were training? And in your mind while you're training, was that something that you envisioned to actively compete, or it just came about?
No, the whole goal was to compete. That was the driving factor. I was pretty impatient. Yeah, it was about 6 months in is when I got that fight, and then I just tried to keep the momentum going, and I was working on it. It was building. It was after my amateur title. No, it was after my pro debut is when I had my knee surgery, and that's when I took the time to start to build more striking technique and build it properly.
Yeah. Your first fight was an amateur fight, or was it a pro fight right away?
Amateur. I had 3 amateur fights.
So 3 amateur fights. After that first fight, you go back to the gym. What was it that, from the experience of the fight and talking to your team, what changed after that first fight for you?
Trying to think.
And what I mean is, like, you experienced the first fight, okay? It's all new to you because you don't have a big amateur background. This is your first time competing. After the fight and you went back and assessed it, what did you see, and what did you start to change in your training going forward after that?
I don't think I did a lot differently in terms of between my first amateur and my second amateur fight. I think I'm not saying that this is the right thing to do, but I think I kind of was riding that high of, that first initial experience and feeling that win and just, that was my first time ever walking out, ever doing it. And I loved it. So I think the only thing I was really focusing on was when my next one was, and I just kind of went back to the regular training that I was doing. I just tried to, improve some positions and stuff in terms of like grappling exchanges and, how to get to where I wanted to be in the fight. But I didn't really put everything together as professionally as I probably should have at the time.
But you're learning on the job, right?
Yeah.
So now you're learning growth as a fighter. Your team is growing with you because, look, they're training you. They take you to the fight. They see the result, and they see what you do well, what you might need improvement on, and what needs to go back to the gym. We got to retool or be better. Walking out of there, I'm sure the attitude was, when am I going to fight again? How fast did that come for you?
I think in the beginning too, especially with the success that I saw and it was always, I was so impatient. It was, when's the next one? When's the next one? Just one track mind. I think between my, after winning my amateur title and then in between my pro debut and talking about whether, I was going to make my pro debut and when, that's when things started to slow down a little bit. That's when, I started to go to Bristol and put together all the pieces a little bit more cohesively. And then that's where that, I guess, I wouldn't say doubt, but more of that, I'm trying to think of the right word, and it's not even hesitation, but
Uncertainty.
yeah, I guess it's like, okay, pro, all of a sudden, it's like, the big leagues, who am I going to fight? What promotion am I fighting? What does it mean? What does that money look like? Which, obviously you find out. And, so that experience, I think that's where I started to slow down a little bit and I guess think it through a little bit more.
Well, now you changed, right? You change into a team of where your preparation, your team is preparing you for the next step. So they have a little experience. And the slowdown is because you have to prepare properly and make sure that the opportunities that are coming for you are the right opportunities, not only financially, but fight-wise also. In the beginning spots that you were training here, do you feel it was hard for you to get fights?
Not in the beginning, not so much. Some of the regional promotions, I have to say, they were always trying to add at least one women's fight to a card. And, I wasn't afraid to travel or do whatever it took to get there and to be on that card. So Cage Wars always gave me the opportunity. They gave me the amateur title fight and my debut. I ended up fighting with a promotion in Philly for my second fight. I guess at that point, I was just anybody who was willing to say yes and to do make weight, I was willing to fight. It wasn't until after my pro debut that we started to become selective with opportunities because, at that stage in the game now, sometimes you get an offer with a 2-week turnaround or a last minute notice thing. And then you have to start to, especially when you have a team, like think about where am I trying to get in my career?
Yeah,
does this fight make sense?
Does it make sense, right? Of course. So let's back up a little bit here. How many amateur fights did you end up having before the decision to turn pro
3
came about? Now, I know what your answer is going to be, okay? But after 3 fights, was your team coming to you and saying, yes, Alex, we're ready to go to the next step, or did you force it?
I think that, and I'm sure you also know this, but I'm super stubborn. As I'm getting older, I still truly believe that whatever I want, to do with my life or to achieve, I can and will. Sometimes, though, things happen on their own timeline and not exactly when I want them to happen. Right. And, it wasn't a matter of, people saying, yes, Alex, you're ready, or now is your time, but more or less saying, do you feel like you're ready for this? Is this something that you want now? Like, these are our thoughts. How do you feel? And then naturally, I had an idea of what I wanted. And so if they're like, that's how you feel, then we support it, but I'm lucky I have, you being one of them as well. People who are honest with me in terms of they'll tell me if I'm making a mistake or they don't believe certain things. And I feel that I can trust,
Yeah, I think from the coaching standpoint, it's not always that a fighter's making a mistake. One, to check a box of a fighter who wants to fight, that's great. I mean, you can't ask for more. If somebody's coming into the gym and they're second guessing themselves, then you already know the answer as a coach. This is not for you, or maybe the timing is not right. As coaches, we have to save you from yourself at times, okay, right? So, making sure the opportunities and making sure everything is right for you makes sense, especially at the professional level. As an amateur, nobody remembers how many amateur fights fighters have had or won or lost. They'll remember their professional fights. They'll remember their first professional fight and maybe their last and some of the in between. While this is happening, right, how much are you training at this point? And how are you blending that with life?
So at the time, I was doing sales jobs, and then I quit to go back to waitressing and bartending to try and split my schedule so I could either train in the afternoon and go to work, in the late afternoon to the evening, or if I'd worked a day shift or, then I would train at night. So that gave me a lot of the flexibility and freedom. And I kind of built my life around that. And then I had a pretty supportive family. I mean, although they didn't love the idea at first, they ended up also acknowledging that I'm going to do what I'm going to do anyway and working with me. So that helped in terms of like the life training balance, and then support from coaches and just people in my life at that time. I would not have gotten this far with doing what I love to do or having a career if not for, the people who.
Right. Yeah, it takes a village,
Yeah.
to support a fighter, whether amateur, professional. Definitely takes a village. You need that support behind you because the next question I'm going to ask you is, and every fighter goes through this, and whether they want to admit it or not, did you question what you were doing at times in the early stages? Because there's so many trials and tribulations that affect fighters, not only the training, the consistent training, the wear and tear on your body, the mental aspect, the social aspect of your life and everything. And people who are on the outside don't always understand what we're kind of doing because we kind of live a crazy life in not only as trainers, but as fighters also, because it consumes you.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, or at least people I know have told me that, but fighters are psychos. And then I think the funny thing, I was listening to a podcast recently as well, and they were talking about how people think fighters are the toughest individuals, but they were actually talking about how they believe fighters are some of the most emotionally sensitive individuals. And I don't mean like weakness, but just they feel a lot, I guess. Or you know what I mean? And I personally have always found that to be true. Like,
Well, I could tell you from a coach, okay? Yes. When a fighter is tough because they push through pain, they push through times that they don't want to train, they push through a fight when it's not going their way. That's the toughness that you see in certain fighters, okay? But as far as, yes, they're human. Some fighters are very needy. Some fighters need to be hugged, some need to be kicked in the ass. You need to know when to do both with them. But, from the coaching standpoint, from people seeing, we're half a psychologist because if you're a good coach, you're around your fighter a lot and you start to pick up, like we talked about when we first met, there's got to be a vibe between the coach and the fighter. If you don't have that vibe, it's hard to, at least for me, to work with somebody on that end. And I know for a certain fighter, you can't work like that. You have to almost know what's happening and be able to tweak that. And like I said, know when to kick you in the ass, when to hug you, because, we're getting you ready to fight. It's not a game. We're not playing golf. We're not playing soccer. It's real, as we'll get into a little further, right? So, yeah, I think from the fighter standpoint, and you could correct me, I think their need needs to know that they're almost safe with you, that they're being taken care of properly and prepared properly. And I think that's where that comes from. But
yeah, no, I agree. And in terms of fighting, like going back to like quitting, and not being happy having this void. I mean, if I'm going to be blunt, it was more of like a mental breakdown. It happened like, it was like a build up to this point in my life. And then there was like one moment where I was driving to work and I freaked out. I like pulled over on the highway in the breakdown lane and I just like gutturally sobbed. And I was like, I cannot fucking do this. I was like, I cannot go to work today. And not because of a work ethic issue, but just I cannot spend another day behind a desk being miserable for another 8, 9, 10 hours and drive home in traffic. And I lost it. And I called out I turned around, went home, and I know this is so corny, but I literally just was in my room and I watched the movie Southpaw and I just cried. And then I just tried to think about like what makes me happy. And it was training, you know? And
Were you training at that point at all?
yeah, I was doing jujitsu at the time. And I just was like, you know what? Instead of just training as a hobby, I was like, this is where I'm happiest. And I was like, how far can I take this? And I was like, what if I took a risk and started to build my life around this dream? Or, you know, I was 25 at the time, which is kind of late. But I was like, if I don't do this now, I'll never be able to do this. In theory, maybe you can, but you know, in terms of having a career, you know what I mean? I felt like it was now or never. And even when the training is hard, or even when, you know, plenty of ups and downs throughout that road too, I don't know, I always felt like I was doing the right thing for myself. And that kind of kept me grounded.
Let's talk about the training, you know, because look, you were an athlete previously, competitively. And I always, you know, knowing myself, look, I was not a fighter. I had 3 amateur fights. I started late, okay? But coming off of being a competitive athlete, I understand that you have a void that you have to fill, that you have to, you know, that competitiveness wants to keep going at some level. The training for you, when you go from doing it and now you start to do it competitively, what was the change from that? Like, you know, you're going leisurely to class and, you know, just, you know, doing your jujitsu and stuff. Now you say, okay, what flipped the switch there for you? And how did you flip the switch?
I think at that point it was a little tough because I was trying to basically now figure out how to flip that switch. You know what I mean? Like I made this decision, you know, I got hired at a new spot in New Canaan where I was, you know, waitressing. And then, you know, I was like, okay, so now I have to figure out my schedule. What does training look like? I'm not training twice or 3 nights a week now. I'm training 6 days a week. You know what I mean? And what kind of supplemental things am I doing? You know, at some point, like where's my striking going to come in? Like, where am I going to go? You know, how does this all take shape? How many coaches am I going to have? Like, I didn't really sit down and plan it out very well. It kind of just organically came together, which is, I'm very lucky for that to have happened. But I guess, you know, I started to just kind of dive in. Like we said, everything about my whole career has been trial by fire, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Some people it works for, some it doesn't. Obviously, you know, for you, knowing yourself and your team around you, knowing you now, it did work for you. Now you're in it. You're living it, which is, like you said, 6, 7 days a week. It's work, train, eat, recover, make sure you do your conditioning and everything else. And, you know, after the build up from your amateur fight, tell us about the build up to your first pro fight.
It's kind of crazy, but so I got this idea in my head and I just wouldn't let it go. But
Before you go there, right?
yeah.
What is the time frame between this amateur to pro? Are we talking a year, 2 years?
I'm going to be honest, this was between 2017 and 2018, so I don't really quite remember.
So it's almost, yeah, I'm saying like you went amateur and it was like within a year you're fighting your first
I think,
pro.
yeah, it was probably around a year, but I couldn't even give you the exact date.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was now training in Bristol, so my striking, you know, kicks, everything was starting to become more cohesive and more solid. And then I just had this one track mind with my pro debut. And I saw that Bellator came to Mohegan Sun. And then ironically, actually, I saw that Mikey Kimball made his debut at Mohegan.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's not a competitive thing, but it's like this person did it. So if it can be done, so why not? And weirdly enough, it kind of came about because I was watching UFC at Buffalo Wild Wings in Waterbury. And the bartender that I had known there, Dave, you know, we would always talk about fights and, you know, all these things. And he knew a guy, Carlos, who was a dog trainer who fought with Bellator at Mohegan Sun. And we started to connect through that. And Carlos was instrumental in, you know, reaching out to Bellator and like getting that connection and that like that fight lined up for me. And I remember constantly I'd go talk to him about it. We would talk about what it would take, you know, and I'd be like impatiently waiting. I just kind of like grabbed on and wouldn't let go, and it ended up coming to be, you know, and it was crazy because I don't know, looking back at it, I laugh because I'm like, what was I doing? Thinking like that was going to work for me, but it did. And I think that's what made this BKFC fight so special too, was it was very nostalgic. You know, walking out in your home state in front of thousands of people. So for my pro debut though, I was very nervous.
So was your pro debut on Bellator?
Yeah.
At Mohegan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was Bellator. It was either, I think it might have been 207. It was Mitrione versus Bader.
Walk us through that experience, because now you're fast tracking. You know, for most people, it takes time to build up to fight on events like that, especially at the time Bellator was hot. They were doing a lot of events, not only at Mohegan, but around the United States. And, you know, it was UFC and it was Bellator at the time as the top two. You know, Bellator was underneath trying to rise up. What was that experience like when you got the call, say, Alex, we're going to put you on this card here? What was the surrealness of it there?
I think the way to sum it up, and it's going to sound crazy, but I think when it comes to fighting especially, but almost all endeavors in which you try to pursue the highest level, you almost need a delusional amount of self-belief. And then I guess the unconscious goal is to show people that your self-belief is real, right? So for me, I was like, I'm going to make this happen. And then when I found out that it was going to happen, it was kind of almost like a reaffirming. It reaffirmed my belief in myself, I guess. So every little bit of success, you know, is that holy shit moment, but also like.
So as fighters, right, the end justifies the means.
Right.
We need to have that, you know, end game of all our training. Because look, in every other competitive sport, you played soccer, you played other sports, there's a game. You go to practice, you're going to play a game once a week, twice a week, whatever it is you're playing. So, you know, practice leads to a game. Unfortunately, in combat sports, there's a wait. You got to practice. You got to go and work your game every week and wait till the fight comes. There's not always an assurance that you're going to fight in a month, 2 months, a year, a half a year, whatever it is. But you have to stay ready, and it's a hard thing mentally.
That was one of the hardest things for me in this whole career, was that uncertainty, the impatience, the injuries, setbacks, having people pull out last minute, you know what I mean? Stuff like that. So it's not an easy.
No, there's a lot of factors that go into it, you know, as far as, it's not a perfect scenario. There are fights that are going to fall out. You know, also, unfortunately, as you gain success, people don't want to match with you. They don't want to fight you. Mm-hmm. Or they say they do, and then that fight falls out, or, you know, and you've trained for X amount of months and the fight is not there. Now you have to, it's an emotional roller coaster. And I'll tell you, for one thing, is like just coming off of our last fight Saturday night, it's like I find myself at a loss this week for almost 3 months, going every day. And then the fight happens and it's like, you kind of like, where do I go now?
I was just telling a friend about that. Usually after fights in the past, whether I won or lost, I would get almost like depressed, like a baseline level of depression. It would last like a week or so. And it's like when you're training, you're exhausted, your body hurts, you know, you want to eat, you want to, you know, just rest or do something and relax. And then all of a sudden after this giant event that you poured every fiber of your being into, you just feel like empty. And then you have the things that you were, wishing you had in the moments when you were training. And now you're like, I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's you know what? Because what happens is when you're getting ready to fight, everything has to be this, right? From the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, every time is accounted for you throughout that day. If you're working, you have to go to work. Okay. From work, I have to do my training. I have to make sure I'm eating properly. I have to do my recovery. I have to do my conditioning. There's so many factors that fall in. You can't say, I'm taking a day off. Well, you take a day off to recover or have a mental day, but you're still doing an active recovery. So you're doing something, right?
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, they pull the rug out, right? You rest for a couple of days and then you wake up the next week and you're like, I'm not going to the gym. Well, I am, but I really don't have to go to the gym because I don't have a fight now. I'm just coming off a fight. I'm going to recover a little bit. I'm going to take a little time for myself mentally, back with your family, your loved ones, and everything else. And then it's like, okay, what's next?
Exactly.
What's next? So, back to you. After the first time in the ring, what goes on after that? And we're going to lead up to bare knuckle, but what goes on with you as far as more MMA fights coming along? Now you got the bug.
Yeah, exactly. So I remember at this time too, I was, promoting this event. That was my first time being on a
Big event.
Big fight poster. You go there, it was very professional. You're signing posters. They have
it's a production.
photo. Yeah, exactly. That was my first time experiencing that kind of a level. And that was what I obviously was dreaming and working towards. So it felt special.
Mm-hmm.
Promoting on Instagram, I remember paying to push my fight poster. I forgot what it was. It was like a paid promotion thing. And ironically, that's how my current manager, Tyson Chartier, saw me, because he had a fighter on the same card. But I guess he came across that poster and then he saw my fight in person. And that's how we ended up, working together and linking up. So it was almost just like these little things that I was doing that I didn't know where they would lead. And then
because you're learning the sport. You're coming in the purest end, starting to train with an ambition to fight competitively and then professionally. What happened is you fight at a big event on your first fight where most people don't get that opportunity. They have to, maybe fight on smaller promotions before they get the call for Bellator or UFC or Contenders for that. But you fight mainstream. So now you meet your manager, and how does that change for you as far as your career?
So
what does that lead to?
I remember, him reaching out to me, and then a lot of people in my coaches and people in my fight life were telling me that he was, one of the biggest names in New England and a huge name in the sport. And if he wants to work with you, that, it's spectacular. And I remember kind of being terrified at this point because I knew that people had managers, but I guess in my head, I'm like, oh shit, I'm like, somebody wants to manage me. And it's like, and then I'm like, you hear horror stories about managers and, and I also didn't really know how that worked, what it looked like. And for me, the biggest thing with him was we met, we clicked instantly. And his philosophy is like you were talking about, working with somebody who you have a connection with or a vibe. He wants to work with people who are like his family, that can be around his family, his kids, people that he can trust and that can trust him. He'll get down on the dirty, like in the mats with you. He'll roll with you. He has fought before. He does coach. You know what I mean? There's nothing he wouldn't do for you. And it's more like a friendship than it is. I'm not saying that he's not a manager or a great manager or,
Right.
But he's very transparent, very loyal. And it was a huge blessing for me and for my career. And he's always been honest and had my best interests at heart. But like I said, always been a good enough friend to tell me if I,
Right.
should consider thinking something through or, breathing for a second. And so I think that was huge. And he's always tried to keep me active, which I greatly appreciated, because after that like that pinnacle, like we were talking about, of being on a major promotion to fighting on regional promotions, to having fights fall through. And then, because my second fight was supposed to be for Bellator as well. So to have all that momentum and then have the rug ripped out from under you and then have to start from scratch is very jarring emotionally. And
Yeah.
it's very blessed that people understand how much of a toll that took on me.
Yeah. So after that first one, what was the lead up for the rest of the fights after that? Because you had some, like you said, little trials and tribulations with Bellator. What came after that?
So my second fight, my pro debut was in October of 2018, sorry, with Bellator, and my turnaround fight was going to be February, I believe. I think it was either November or February. It was a very quick turnaround. I had an opponent locked in. It was going to be, trying to remember which card it was. I think it was an MVP card, but in training, I had gotten injured and my ACL got torn. And it was probably one of the most painful things I've ever experienced because this girl fell on the outside of my leg and like the whole thing snapped inward, swelled up immediately, and then it went down. So I was training, running, and then everyone was yelling at me because they were like, you need to get an MRI. And I didn't want to get an MRI because I think deep down inside I knew that if I got the MRI results.
That's the end result, yeah.
Yep. And then I was, told that my MCL, meniscus, ACL was blown apart. And then came the, I guess, the talks about whether the fight would continue or whether, it was smarter to pull out and get the surgery. And I fought tooth and nail to not pull out because I did not want to get the surgery. I wanted to do it after the fight. But I listened to my coaches and Tyson at the time, who told me that they really think that it would be smarter for my career in the long run if I got the surgery first. And in some ways, I think that I probably should have gotten the surgery after the fight because COVID, I mean, no one could have seen that coming.
Right.
COVID derailed all momentum anyway. So I think it might have been maybe better if I didn't. But I think everything does happen for a reason. And, I couldn't have imagined where I am now if I look at my mindset of where I was at then. So I don't think changing anything, what I mean?
I mean,
It
you look
doesn't
back,
matter.
hindsight's 20/20, right?
Yeah.
So, like, nobody could envision COVID because you and other fighters and those were just shut down. It was just shut down totally like that. But, I get the fact being injured and wanting to continue, but, if you're going to have a career, you have to be healthy. You can't be out there, not being 100% physically. Because not being 100% physically leads you to be, in the back of your mind, not being 100% emotionally either.
Yeah.
Because you have that thought that now you're changing up. No matter what anybody says, a fighter, we said it before, we got to save you. If you're a true fighter, we got to save you, right? We're going to say, you know what? Yeah, you want to fight, 100%. But to go out there and it's in your mind and you can't be 100%. Because now, whether you think so or not, you're going to change something about what you do. Maybe it's unconsciously, maybe it's consciously, but it's going to happen. So all this time, you have the surgery, obviously, correct?
Yes.
You've had some other injuries. And where does that bounce you back into the sport?
So, yeah, I tore my my labrum in my shoulder at some point too, and at that point, I was also in talks to being on the Ultimate Fighter. I think it was the flyweight and heavyweight season, and that fell apart last minute. And then I had a CES fight lined up, and I was already training in the gym consistently, and my shoulder didn't. I was kind of surprised because I have a lot of people in my life who have had that same injury and they're unable to train or fight the way they want. I'm not sure what it is about, at least with my arm, but I don't have some of those same setbacks. And I think the caveat is with boxing, it's a little different because in MMA that you're blending a lot of different things. So it wasn't as striking heavy. So, it didn't really interfere too much. I will say with the boxing training, had to work around some stuff with it. But overall, I mean,
Yeah,
it hasn't really.
we're working your arms a lot more.
Correct.
Whereas, like, with kicks and ground, you could utilize your hands a little easier
Right.
off your strikes, right? So you don't have to be strike heavy.
Right. But it hasn't, in terms of like the ACL versus the labrum injury, there were times where my knee would completely buckle and I would lose that
Stability.
Yeah, and it's very jarring. With my shoulder, I haven't really experienced anything like that would gravely interfere. So I'm fortunate in that way. So with boxing, it's definitely a little different, but I'm learning how to take care of my body, like you said, recover, and just work around it the best way possible because, I think I needed to be saved with my leg because I was willing to literally go out there and, I was like, you can't tear it twice, And they're like, well, you can permanently damage it in other ways. And I wasn't thinking like that because.
And you need that stability, and nothing for nothing now because of, the athletes being bigger, stronger, faster today. We're seeing more knee injuries in combat sports, not only in MMA, but in boxing. Stability is an issue sometimes if you're not training properly, where those legs and your core is strong enough to maintain that. But so with all of this, we'll lead up to where you get a call now in between here for bare knuckle. Walk us through that when that transpires. Now you're out a little bit. You're still training, but you're not competing as much as you were.
Yeah, I think after the Ultimate Fighter falling through and, I lost that CUS fight by split decision. And I just, at that point, I was kind of heavy on the heartbreak with that sport. And I just, I was trying to switch careers. I was trying to figure out, I guess now.
Life.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of stepped away and I barely trained and I was happy and I switched things around. I started to put together my career and grow as a person. I met my wife, so I was happy. But I guess they're like we talked about that void. Whenever I'd tell my wife about like fighting or we'd watch fights, I'd get emotional. And it was, in the good and the bad times, it was I'll never feel that way again, and I guess, I'd describe it to her and she would say like, part of me is sad that I never got to experience, what that was like for you or be there and watch you fight. So fast forward this past December, BKFC was coming to Mohegan and my manager had, I don't know how many people he had on the card, but a lot of familiar regional names that I knew.
Okay.
And I texted him and I was like, hey, hope all is well. I haven't seen you in a while. And I was like, are you going to be at the fights in December? And he was like, yeah, I'll be there. And I was like, oh, I can't wait to see you, and I was looking forward to it. And that would be the first time my wife has ever seen a live, fighting event. So she was pumped. And then about 20 minutes after that text, I got a text from him saying, I think you could be a real star at BKFC. And then I just sat there in my kitchen kind of dumbstruck because then I started to get like crazy.
The old part comes back.
Yeah.
Now let me ask you, was that thought in your head prior to going to the event and speaking to your manager? A little bit? Did it cross your mind, or
Nope.
It was just like I'm gonna go watch the fights. We're gonna have a nice night out and enjoy this time together and watch the fights.
I think I thought in the past about what bare knuckle must be like because I think a lot of fighters are like, oh, that's crazy. I would never do that. But I think deep down inside, if you're a combat sports athlete, I'm not saying you would do it, but I think everyone's at least thought about what that must be like. You know what I mean? I feel like it's the purest version of a fight almost. Not saying that everyone would pull the trigger, but
it's when I first experienced it after watching it, and it is the ultimate gladiator. I think the closest thing that we're going to see to gladiators fighting.
yeah, the blood,
Well, the whole premise is that there's no way around it. You're not going there. We were talking previously. You're not going there, and I don't want this to sound wrong because
No, yeah.
there is skill, right? But you're not going there to be a technical fighter and put on a show that way, technical. You're going there to put on a war. You're
Right.
going to war. And with that, you're leaving everything out there. So what comes with war is death and destruction. And that's
Yep.
what it is. I mean, I can't sum it up any other way. I mean, you fought it. I've worked events. I've seen them. It's definitely, you're putting your toughness on the line no matter what.
Yeah, and I think when I watched it live for the first time, I've seen it on TV, I've seen clips, and it's like, oh, that's sick, or that's cool, or holy shit, look at the blood. But when you see it live and like it goes so fast, the pace, I mean, the knockdowns, I was blown away. I had a blast watching it. I was like, holy shit, this is incredible. My wife's not a violent person. She is the least violent person I know. And she was practically falling out of her seat screaming. And she was like, this is so exciting. So
I think for me, the first time working an event, hearing the fist hit is a different sound than when you hear gloves hit somebody. You hear that when someone connects properly with their fist, you hear that thud. It's still in my head. I could still hear it, right?
Yeah.
And you're right. It goes quick. There's no time to really blink of what's going on.
Yeah.
It happens so fast.
Yeah, just watching it and experiencing it, you know what I mean? Like I remember having these little mental adjustments, but I was trying to implement them, and like already the bell would be ringing and I'd be like, holy shit, you know what I mean? And then you're just covered in blood and you're like trying to, I guess, like you're in a flow state, but also you're not, you know?
So your manager says this to you. How long did it take for you to really say, like, are you crazy? Yes, no, maybe so. Where does it go to you from there?
So at that point, I looked at my wife and I told her, I was like, if he'd said that to me, he wouldn't say it if it wasn't something that, was basically like a pseudo offer if I was interested. So we go there, Parker Porter was headlining the card, so he's the last fight. I'm waiting for Tyson to come out in the end. We hug and then we talk, and I'm like, hey, if I did want to do this, let's say, what would that look like? He's like, if you want it, he's like, it's yours. You just have to get to training and talk to, Jeff and talk to, your coaches and let me know what you want. And so I pretty much just kind of reeled for a day or two and thought, and thinking about it. And I was trying to think about, how I'd balance that with work. And then, I reached out to my coaches and I was like, hey, I have a crazy idea. And they were all for it because, I was like, I don't have to, when it comes to MMA, I'm not saying that any combat sport doesn't have a high level of commitment, because it does, but in order to take all these different disciplines and effectively, put it together for a fight, you're training, I don't even know, like 3-4 hours a night sometimes. You're in the gym from 6 to 10 o'clock at night, and then it's 6 days a week.
And you have to hit every aspect of it. You have to give enough time, right? So, ground, kicks, striking, you have to spend enough time. And most people are strong in some areas and they do have a weakness, which they tend to work on. So, okay, you give the okay, you go back. How soon does the call come?
So I want to say December 21st or 20th was that card. And by my birthday, January 21st, I think I got the fight poster for Bare Knuckle. by my birthday. So a month later, I already had my poster. So I'd say probably 2.5, 3 weeks after basically watching that card, I already had an opponent, already had signed the deal with BKFC.
So once you have the conversations prior to the signing of the contract, you have the conversation that this could happen, you jump back in the gym.
Pretty much right away. I just started to figure out, like, I had already trained at Nick's gym before, FAA, and, I knew Nick, so I went over to talk to him, asked him what he thought, and then, he was like, absolutely, come in, we'll start to get to work, and then, I started to build, and that's, obviously how we met, so I started to build a sort of a pseudo training regimen around my schedule, and then started to figure out what days work better for certain things, and just started to basically just dive in again, trial by fire. And I mean, the momentum was quick.
Yeah. You signed the fight. Now it's surreal. But also now your life has changed also. You have a full-time job. You're in a relationship. You're not Alex by herself anymore.
Yeah.
How is this coming together now as a dynamic for your training and everything else?
So luckily I work in the evenings, which frees up my morning time. And then my wife has the opposite schedule for me. So she works during the day. So with the more focused training, but like the less, it doesn't take as long in terms of the amount of hours.
I'm not talking about the training. I know the training end is training end is the easy end.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about the challenges that come with the training end, the challenges that come, the stress that might come on your job or your relationship or your family or your person, that stuff. How is that going back into the deep end of the pool?
I think luckily this time around, actually, just because of, my wife and who she is, and, the little things, like she would make sure my meals were done. She was very forgiving and supportive. And I have to say, I think the only time I really start to get mildly difficult is when I'm really cutting weight and dialing it in.
Well, that's natural for any athlete, any fighter. But, you made a good point there. Now, your wife never experienced this. And we talked about this. People who don't experience what we do don't understand the madness that we do. We could explain it. They're used to seeing the fight on fight night, and they don't realize all the stuff that goes through it, the emotion, the training, everything. It's madness. It's really, when you think about it, the build up to get ready for a fight, everybody involved. It's just the real people out there are like, what the hell are you guys doing? It's so you have that support, which I think is big for a fighter. A fighter needs that support, not only by their team, but at home also. Do you think that made it easier for you this time around? Because now you're not basically doing it on your own, where now you have somebody, you're coming home, you have somebody who's there, they're supporting your decision to go forward and fight, and, really being behind you.
Yeah. I will say, like, in the past, I've been on my own, or I've had partners that have been supportive of my fight career. I don't think I've ever been with anybody who has been unsupportive of my fight career.
Okay.
But having the right partner with you,
having somebody all in with you.
Correct. And then just I will say, when it comes to me and my wife, something that I think we do really well, is our ability to communicate. Maybe it's because we're both girls, but I'll explain like all the psychotic thoughts that go through my brain. Like, I don't hold back. So like, when, fighting is crazy. But I guess maybe living with me, it's just a different version of my crazy, but it's not new.
Yeah, but you know what? It's when you're not involved in the sport now, okay, she never saw you fight. Now you take her to bare knuckle, which is probably like, out of all the events that you could take her to, for her first event, is just crazy.
Yeah.
It's a crazy night, right? And then you go back and say, yeah, I'm going to fight on this event.
Yeah.
And what was her response? I want to hear that. I want to hear, like, did she look at you and say, are you fucking crazy? Or, you know what?
She was all for it, to be honest. I think that she started to get anxious towards the closer we got to fight night. I think the excitement and the, oh, wow, you could totally do this,
The
to
lead up.
the holy shit, it's fight night, like nerves. You know, I think it
Yeah,
was
because
definitely a
she's never
buildup.
been there before, so she doesn't know what the buildup is like to get there.
Right. Or even cutting weight.
Yeah.
Like she got anxious because, you know, you get in the tub, you're naked, you're sweating out, you look like a skeleton, you know, I'm like dizzy, I'm laying on the floor, and then I'm getting back in. She's like, are you okay? Just checking on you. Do you need something? And I'm like, I don't need anything. I'm just, you know, you're just trying to hold
you're
on.
You're going through the whole thing to cut the weight. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just not, you're watching it happen, but you can only describe what it feels like to somebody who's never
you're
done
not
it.
there, but you're not.
Yeah.
Listen, do you know that cutting the weight in the tub stuff is
Right. She's ordering like takeout and she's like, is it okay? I'm like, honey, you can eat in the room. I don't care. You know.
Yeah. All right. So you get your opponent. All right. And, you know, you're training across the board, and we talked about this. What's the feeling like as it gets closer now? And we looked at your opponent. You know my feelings. I'm not going to say anything more about that than we've talked about privately. But it's getting closer. And, you know, you did a great camp. You know, true professional as far as camp and cutting weight. What's it getting like for you now as it's getting close? It's getting real.
I think there's like those nerves, so trying to manage some of the nervous feelings, trying to remember, because it had been 4 years, that the
Right.
nerves are normal. You know, your nerves come from your body prepping for fight or flight mode, and you know, when you're about to fight, it's an important thing, but also just, you know, managing those. You know, I visualize a lot, and I visualize, you know, outcomes before they happen. I visualize like sensations and feelings. And I guess I was remembering, you know, or visualizing the last time I had made that walk in that stadium in that way, because they're almost identical, the Bellator walkout and the BKFC walkout, in terms of the, you know, that runway and you're backstage. So I had a good baseline to go off of. But, you know, for me, once I'm in the fight, I'm in it. But that preemptive on deck, backstage, hearing the screaming, hearing the thud of the skin on bone shit, like, you know, your heart starts pounding. And then I guess, you know, trying to remember what that feels like and to put myself there, you know, while I was working, while I was in the car, while I was.
But now you're in a whole new expectation. And once again, you're fighting on a big card. You know, BK is blowing it up everywhere they can go right now. David Feldman, shows he's putting on are just getting bigger and bigger. The fan base from the beginning to now where he is right now. Fighters want to fight on these promotions. We're getting to see not only boxers, MMA people, but people of all walks of life wanted to fight on these promotions now. Now, you're out of the game for a while. You're not in the combat aspect of it. So now you're going back into a whole new realm. Did that concern you a little bit?
Not really. And I'll say this, the unknown, like, is always the thing that we're all most afraid of, right? But it's still a fight. And I think that something I at least try to do to the best of my ability is to grow as a person. And sometimes growth means change, you know what I mean? Or reinvention. And, you know, I try to just go into it with a whole new mindset. And, you know, like I said, I kind of have an idea of what it's like based off of what other people are telling me, but I can't tell you what it's like until I experience it fully, which now I can. But, you know.
And this is something like, even like, you know, with MMA or boxing, we can simulate it as close as it can be to the fight. We can simulate training and sparring. With bare knuckle, we don't spar bare knuckle.
No.
So you can't simulate that feeling of what it's like to fight without gloves.
Right. And I know this is shocking to everybody, but before fighting professionally, I didn't fight people. I never like got into fights with people. You know what I mean? I've never gotten into a bar fight, even though it's a bucket list item for me. But, you know, I just never.
Well, we could day drink today and see what happens
Yeah,
after
exactly.
this,
Yeah.
But, all right, fight night. We studied your opponent. What did you think was when they gave you the opponent? How did you feel about that? And, to me, styles make fights.
Mm-hmm. So for me, like I said, sometimes my coaches just have to save me from things because I'm like, oh, I'll fight a man, for the right money. I don't care. But.
And you heard that here. If anybody wants to make that happen,
Yeah, I'm like,
you can call her manager.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure he would love that. But when someone gives me an opportunity, for me, it's the most important thing to me is that they're game. You know what I mean? I want someone who's going to show up and fight. You know what I mean? Make the weight, be there.
Right. Be as professional as you are.
Correct. And no matter what kind of a person you are, I'm not really interested. I don't care. You know what I mean? My coaches will watch tape. They'll tell me what they see. I'll watch it. I'll see if that lines up with my thought process. We'll come up with a plan and then try to execute it. But I don't think too much about my opponents as human beings, I guess.
Right.
Everyone has a different strategy or mindset when it comes to, how they fight, I guess. For me, I know this sounds kind of awful. And outside of fighting, I don't feel this way. But I kind of depersonalize them or dehumanize them, when I'm getting ready for a fight. To me, they're inconsequential. It's it's an object I have to move through.
Right. They're in your way.
Yeah, I don't look at them like a human being until after the fight. And
Right.
Obviously afterward,
I agree.
You hug, I'm grateful because without an opponent, there's no show and there's no fight. And, someone who tests you in that moment, it's pivotal and that's huge. So, I think my opponent brought that out and that's huge for me. You couldn't ask for anything better. But that's kind of the mindset I have with everybody that I fight until afterward, at least.
Listen, I think that's, look, that person's in your way. That person is stopping you from getting to the next step of your career. And that's the way you got to look at it. It's business. It's not personal. It's business, right? Afterwards, you can be human beings, hug, shake hands.
Correct.
If not. But so the fight night comes. And for people who did not see this fight, and look, I was very proud of not only being able to be a part of it, of your training and your camp, but for what you did professionally. You prepared as a professional. You fought as a professional. You carried yourself as a professional. So for people who haven't seen this fight, bare knuckle at Mohegan Sun in March, I would recommend it. You go out and you put Fight of the Night on. And it was a war. Going through the fight, walk us through your emotions, your mindset happening in that fight.
So, when I first started fighting, a lot of the time I would just black out and I wouldn't remember details of the fight and I'd have to watch it back. Later on in my career, I remember moments in the fight or in my head more.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely nervous. Definitely felt focused though. And then I think the question that was mostly circulating through my brain in the beginning was, what is this going to feel like, I guess? Because again, you can't simulate bare knuckle.
Yeah.
And then in my head, I'm thinking about what I'm trying to execute. And then all of a sudden all hell breaks loose and my entire game plan goes out the window. And I'm like, okay, fuck. I take a shot and I immediately feel warmth. I'm like, I'm bleeding. I didn't realize how bad I was bleeding, but I could feel it all over me. And I'm like, okay, whatever. It's almost like slow motion, I guess. It's a weird way to explain it, but in that moment, I feel the blood, I'm cut, and the impact is heavy. Painful isn't really the right word because I think in the moment you're not really feeling pain.
Yeah, you're not feeling it because your adrenaline's running so high.
Yeah, but I definitely, I'm tripped over my own foot. I'm backed up, and then I feel like that heavy thud in the blood everywhere. So it was a little bit more than I was anticipating in terms of the sensation and, the overall experience. And then before you know it, the round's already over, so I remember going back to my corner and Jeff and Tyson were there and they were both saying like, you have to throw more, you have to start getting your jab out there and you have to do something. And I remember kind of like that shifting my focus immediately. And, for me, regardless of the outcome of a fight, my biggest thing is I didn't fucking do all this work and cut this weight and sign up to quit in the middle of a fight. Like I would rather fucking die. So I think that kind of flipped a switch in me. And then I started to throw the jab more. I started to feint more. And then my right started to land more. And then I started to see in her face that she stopped moving forward as much. She was still throwing though. But I started to, I guess, regain more control of myself and of the fight.
You bit down on your mouthpiece.
Yeah.
You started to calm down and you started to see, which, look, in transition and fighting, that makes the difference, okay? Because you could have easily been taken out of your game, but you came back. And look, if we talked about the fight again, right, we knew in the beginning her shot was to take advantage of you early, that your resilience and your toughness was going to be what is going to bring you into that fight. And I felt she wasn't built like you. So second round, you start to get relaxed, get comfortable. Shit starts working your way a little bit.
Yes. And, the other day I went to watch one of my friends, a couple of my friends actually, speak at Yale regarding neuroscience and sport, particularly fencing. But something that I think translates across most sports, but especially combat sports, is making something second nature. It's a simple concept, but it is so life-saving, and so you don't realize what you're doing, but you're doing it. We had worked that check hook so much, but I didn't consciously throw it because I was thinking I'm going to land a check hook. It was automatic. I couldn't even tell you when I threw it. I couldn't even tell you the timing of it, but it was right there because of the work that we had done on making that a part of eating, breathing, sleeping. And I think there was a lot of things that we did in preparation that came out in the fight that way, crashing in, clinching, being physical, the check hook, when I started to get into that rhythm, little things that we had done, movement wise. So, I think that's where, technique, I don't know if that's technique per se, but it is.
Yeah, I think
you make technique second nature.
Well, listen, it's repetition, right?
Yeah.
So, we talk about that. It was repetitive, it was done, and it was talked about in the sense, look, this is your safety valve. If you need to use it, break the glass and use it, right? Throw it, use it. And we felt that was going to be there because of her style. But now the fight's deep. I mean, you're going back and forth. And personally, I felt you won the fight. I'm being biased. I felt you won the fight on many levels there. Is the thought there in the middle of the fight when you could take this fight over? And you knocked her down twice.
Yeah, I mean, obviously if this was MMA, it would be a very different, thing. Because,
Right.
It's that, again, that second nature automatic,
reflex.
And you have to think it through, stop. But yeah, when you start getting those knockdowns, I think it's you start to smell blood, like a shark in the water kind of, and you're like, okay, I'm close. But with 2-minute rounds, you can only do so much. I don't know if bare knuckle rounds should be longer than 2 minutes with the amount of just physical damage. But, you have 2 minutes to work and try and execute. And obviously it's successful for a lot of people and you can finish a fight in a matter of seconds. But sometimes, had I had a little bit more time, maybe, would have been interesting. Or, had I settled in earlier in the fight, maybe. But, sometimes you can't look at the what ifs and you
Yeah.
just,
Listen, you take factors. Look, you've been out of the ring for a while. Okay, to come walking back in. You're right. You can't do what ifs. What if you started sooner? But what happened is you changed in the middle of the fight. Okay, you were able to adjust. I don't want to say change. You adjusted after not having a rhythm. You were able to adjust and settle down into the fight. And look, unfortunately, the fight was a draw, but your performance, I mean, you could have quit after the first round. You could have, after, like, wow, look at this. But, the fight went on and just you walked through the fire. I mean, that says a lot. I mean, I don't know. I know the outcome didn't turn out the way you wanted it, okay? But honestly, your performance opened a lot of eyes for a lot of people as you as a fighter.
I think in the past, a lot of the source of my unhappiness in this sport was because I was very outcome driven and not process driven. And there are definitely things about the process that are challenging or sometimes, don't love. But this was the first fight I think that I've had that I wasn't particularly outcome driven by, like, not in terms of I always want to win and I'm always trying to improve and win.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I've, even in winning my pro debut or having a finish, I don't think I've ever had as many people and as people who are close to me and strangers and, whatever, tell me how proud they were of me. Like you and Tyson and Jeff, like the words you guys said to me blew me out of the water. And I had strangers come up to me and tell me, like, how much my fight meant to them or, how much fun they had. And just, like Tyson and Jeff said too, like you're getting paid regardless. You could have quit after that round and you could have given up and it wouldn't have changed like that. But instead you fought to fight and you didn't give up. And like, that for me, I'm not saying that it changes a draw, but it feels like a win,
Listen, you gave your all, okay? You gave your all through adversity in a fight. People, look, and I'm not going to keep playing on it. For anybody listening here, needs to watch the fight to understand what we're talking about in this fight. Okay? You're a true warrior in the fight. Okay? No matter what. Nobody can take that away from you. As a coach, look, you walked out of there. Thank God you weren't hurt. Okay? You had some scrapes and bruises and needed stitches. You healed and you live to fight another day or do whatever you want. On that note, what is next for you now? Are we going to see you back in the ring?
Yeah. I mean, there's already a tentative date discussed. No opponent yet. And, it's not publicly announced yet, but, it'll definitely be probably late this summer and I'm going to start gearing back up to get back to training. I want to, focus on, some of the stuff that I want to improve on and, now I know what to expect and I want to showcase some new stuff and, go out there and hopefully, obviously get the win, but also, have another inspiring performance.
Yeah. So, my experience with bare knuckle and watching the women fight, a lot of the women fights are very, very exciting. And there's a lot of talent out there right now in the women's division in bare knuckle and a lot of names out there. After being there, do you see yourself moving up on that level or being on that level right now of some of the more experienced women out there who have fought on bare knuckle?
Absolutely. I mean, I had a lot of fun doing it. It was, unlike anything I've ever experienced. And there are like definitely names that I want to go against and I want to challenge myself. You know, I want to fight more, and there are definitely like venues I want to fight at. I want to fight at Sturgis, you know, I want to travel more, but you know, being able to fight at Mohegan's incredible, and to share that with, you know, people in my life that, you know, from our home state.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, I mean, I'd love to move up the rankings and take it as far as I possibly can with it.
Well, you know, Alex, like I said, I'm very proud of you. True professional. For someone who's been out of the game a little bit to come back in, not at an easy place. Okay, you know, it's combat sports are tough as it is, but you know, you come back in and just challenge yourself amazingly, and you know, we hope to have you back. You know, maybe when you announce your next fight, we can have you back in here and talk about that. But I really thank you, and I appreciate you taking the time out here today for coming on. It means a lot.
No, thank you for having me.
All
I
right.
appreciate
Well,
it.
you know, we can't be here without our sponsors, Farmer Strength and Leone 1947. Really appreciate their support for us. And once again, this is Coach Dave. Train hard, train smart, and we'll see you in the next round.